A German Shepherd puppy burst from the rain-lashed ravine mud, clinging to its fur, shivering violently, one leg twisted yet alive, thanks to the stranger who had clawed it from the slick slope. Moments later, the emergency doors of Denver's hospital slammed open. That tiny heartbeat on the gurney became a trail back into Black Ridge Canyon, pointing toward a missing couple and a shifting landslide, minutes from disappearing forever. The pup knew the way. Boone McAllister followed. Mud gave underfoot, ropes groaned, and a faint voice called from the shadows. What unfolded next would make you believe that even the smallest life can guide the way to miracles. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments. If no soul, human or animal, should be left behind in the storm, hit subscribe. Denver lay snug against the Rocky Mountains foothills, the air heavy with pine resin and the distant murmur of snow-melt rivers. That evening, low-hanging clouds rolled across the ridges like gray wool, and the damp chill promised rain before midnight. Street lamps flickered golden halos, cutting through the mist. On the outskirts where houses thinned and the pine forest opened, the community hospital rose as a squat brick and steel block. Fluorescent lights glowed against the gloom, a beacon for the sick, the weary, and sometimes the lost. Inside, Clara May Whitlow prepared for her night shift. In her mid-30s, tall and composed, her shoulders bore the subtle slump of years in emergency medicine. Auburn-touched brown hair was tied neatly at her nape. Her face carried both sternness and warmth. Sharp cheekbones, steady gray-green eyes, and faint lines deepened when she reassured frightened patients. Colleagues knew her as calm under pressure, meticulous yet quietly kind. She had lost a younger brother to a car accident in medical school, a memory that forged a vow never to turn away when life hung by a thread. Tonight, with her stethoscope draped around her neck and a cooling cup of coffee at her elbow, she expected the usual mix: sprains, coughs, and the occasional barroom drunk. The ER was quiet hum of machines and keyboard clicks filling the space. At the front desk, Tula Rain, a nurse in her early 50s, monitored the near-empty waiting room. Tall, narrow-shouldered, her frame stretched thin by decades of night shifts. Wheat blonde hair had silvered, twisted into a loose bun. Pale blue eyes, rimmed with fatigue, still held gentleness. Life had not been kind. Her husband died in a mining accident, leaving her to raise 2 children alone. That loss made her wary, sometimes brusque, but loyal to those who suffered. Patients often remembered her dry humor more than her worn appearance. Tonight she exchanged a weary smile with Clara May, noting the shift might be mercifully quiet. By the sliding glass doors, Amos Thatcher, the night security guard, leaned against the wall, scanning the lobby. In his 40s, thick-set with broad arms, shaped by years of construction, his face bore hard lines from bar fights and domestic disputes. Yet his eyes softened when they met children or the elderly. Duty was serious business for him. Protecting this small hospital was his form of service after an old knee injury had ended his police ambitions. Uniform crisp badge, dull under harsh light, walkie-talkie hanging loose. Minutes passed without incident, until the hospital doors burst open, violently snapping heads toward the entry. Cold air and the smell of damp earth rushed in. Amos straightened, hand brushing his baton. Tula dropped her pen in surprise. Clara May turned, frowning. Framed in the doorway was a man who seemed carved from the mountains themselves. Boone McAllister, 41. A former cavalryman filled the doorway with presence, body sagging from exhaustion. Tall over 6 feet once, battle-hardened, now gaunt from months alone. Dark hair streaked with gray clung damp to his forehead. Rough beard shadowed his jaw. Torn, mud-soaked clothes, scuffed boots. But it was not his battered appearance that froze the room, it was what he carried. Cradled in his arms was a German Shepherd puppy, barely 3 or 4 months old. Fur once sleek, black and tan, matted with wet dirt and streaks of blood. One hind leg dangled unnaturally. Ribs faintly visible beneath matted fur hinting at days without proper food. Yet the pup lived, chest rising in shallow, rapid breaths, ears twitching at every sound. Later, they'd learn its name was Whiskey, but in that moment it was just a fragile life in desperate need. Gasps echoed in the lobby. A woman waiting for her elderly father clutched her purse tighter. A young man hesitated in the corner, uncertain whether to run. Amos stepped forward, voice sharp. "Sir, you can't just—" But Boone's eyes lifted, words faltering, steady gaze calm, as a man who had known battlefield chaos and its eerie silence. His gray-blue eyes, rimmed with fatigue, didn't plead or threaten. They carried a quiet authority that stilled the room. His hoarse, firm voice cut through the tension. "Save him first, Boone," McAllister said. "Don't worry about me," he added, and the pup whimpered softly, curling closer into the crook of his arm. Clara May Whitlow stepped forward, training taking over every instinct to question. She caught the raw desperation beneath Boone's steady exterior, the kind of need that comes from a man who has already sacrificed everything and would do it again without hesitation. She nodded once to Amos Thatcher, silently signaling this was no threat. "Bring him here," she instructed, gesturing toward an empty gurney. "We'll take care of the dog." Boone moved stiffly every step, revealing the toll of exhaustion. His boots left muddy prints on the linoleum. When he reached the gurney, he lowered Whiskey with a gentleness at odds with his scarred hands. For a brief moment his shoulders sagged, as if the weight of the pup had been his last tether. Tula Rain hesitated at the desk, muttering about animals in the ER, but even her tired eyes softened at the sight of the puppy's broken leg. Amos relaxed his grip on the baton, though he stayed close, studying Boone like a puzzle. Clara May bent over the small body on the gurney, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. The pup's eyes fluttered open brown and clouded with pain. When Boone placed a calloused hand on its head, the ears flicked forward as if reassured. Clara May noticed the bond immediately. The animal trusted him completely, and he seemed anchored only by its fragile existence. "Sir," she said gently, glancing up. "You're bleeding too. We'll need to—" "I told you him first, please." Boone's voice cracked on the last word. The mask of control slipping just long enough for Clara May to glimpse the man beneath the uniform, a soldier who had seen too much loss, now clinging to the life of a small creature, as if it were redemption itself. Outside, the wind rattled the glass doors. Rain pounded harder. A steady percussion mirrored the tension in the room. Clara May rolled the gurney closer to her work area, signaling Tula Rain to bring bandages and an IV kit. Whiskey, muddy and trembling, lay small against the sterile white sheet, its breathing shallow but stubborn. Clara May's hands moved quickly, checking vitals, pressing gently against the tiny ribcage, feeling the rapid flutter of the pup's heart. She murmured under her breath, using the same soothing rhythm she often used with children, though tonight her patient had paws instead of hands. Boone McAllister stood nearby, swaying slightly from exhaustion, but his eyes never left the pup. He held the posture of a man trained to remain upright no matter the circumstance. Yet his body betrayed fatigue, shoulders slumped, knees bent, as if ready to give way. Mud streaked his forearms, crusted in the lines of his knuckles, nails jagged and rimmed with dried blood. Clara May noticed them, as she reached for scissors to cut away the tattered blanket clinging to the pup. She paused. "You hurt yourself digging him out," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. Boone's voice was hoarse, measured, as if he hadn't spoken to another human in days. "Rock and clay. I didn't notice until afterward." He flexed his fingers once. Tiny drops of blood welled where fresh cuts reopened. His indifference to his own pain only deepened the weight of the moment. Amos Thatcher had stayed close hand, near his belt, though the initial alarm had faded. He was less concerned about Boone than the strange sight of a combat-worn man refusing care while pleading for a dog. He muttered something under his breath about crazy mountain folks, but didn't move. Meanwhile, Tula Rain returned with supplies brisk and practical. "Dogs in bad shape," she said, her voice roughened by long nights. "Fracture here?" She pointed to the twisted hind leg, probably dehydrated too. Flat tone, yet. Clara May caught the flicker of compassion in the older nurse's eyes as she helped steady the pup. Even pragmatic Tula could not ignore the whimpering cries of something so young. Clara May palpated the leg carefully, noting the unnatural angle. "Compound fracture," she murmured, then looked up. "We need to stabilize him." The pup whimpered again. Boone instinctively leaned forward, his broad frame shading the gurney. He whispered a single word, and the dog's ears twitched as if recognizing the voice. Clara May frowned. "Does he know you?" Boone hesitated, glanced at Clara May, Tula, and Amos, then shook his head. "I don't think so. I found him trapped, his voice thin but certain. I heard him crying in the canyon. Couldn't just walk away." "Canyon," Clara May repeated. Black Ridge, Boone said, clipped. "Rock slide, buried under debris. Took me hours." Clara May studied him longer. Mud smeared his clothing in irregular patterns packed thick under his nails. His face showed exhaustion, but his eyes held no deceit. She turned back to the dog. "Well, your timing saved him." Tula Rain injected fluids, while Clara May Whitlow set the leg with careful precision. The pup flinched, then stilled under Boone McAllister's steadying hand. It was as if he were the anchor, holding the little creature to the world. Clara May asked softly, "What's his name?" Boone's mouth curved faintly, almost a smile, but not quite. "There's a tag," he said. "Whiskey." The name seemed to fit perfectly. Even under the harsh fluorescent lights, the pup's sable and tan coat absorbed the glow, blending with streaks of mud. His eyes, when they opened briefly, were deep amber, reflecting both fear and stubborn determination. At that moment, Eli Cormack, the hospital's young veterinary consultant, entered. In his late 20s, with tousled black hair and round glasses that kept sliding down his nose, he carried himself with eager energy, as if every call were a puzzle waiting to be solved. "Got your message," Eli said, slightly out of breath from rushing through the rain. He adjusted his glasses and looked at the pup. "GermanShepherd, maybe 4 months. Broken leg, dehydrated." His eyes flicked to Boone. "And you must be the rescuer." Boone nodded once. Silent. Eli grinned faintly, already donning gloves. "Well, whiskey looks like you're in good hands tonight." He worked alongside Clara May, steady and efficient. His demeanor was lighter than hers, but equally careful. As they worked, Clara May risked another glance at Boone. "You live near Black Ridge, Boone?" Hesitated. "Cabin a few miles out. Keeps me away from people." "Amos Thatcher." The guard snorted quietly, but said nothing. Clara May caught the toned skepticism mixed with a kind of resigned respect. Many men retreated after wars. She knew carrying battles that had never left their bones. Boone's eyes never left the pup. When I heard him, I thought, maybe it was a person, he said. A child, maybe. But when I dug through, it was him. Small, weak. Didn't matter. Couldn't leave him. His jaw tightened, and the next words carried weight. I've left enough behind. The room fell silent except for the rain hammering outside and the soft beeps of medical monitors. Clara May finally spoke, her voice steady but gentle. You saved him, Boone. That matters. For the first time, Boone's shoulders eased slightly, as if some of the weight pressing down had lifted. Yet even empty now, his arms seemed to remember the shape of the pup. He stood as though bracing against collapse, unwilling to relax until Whiskey was safe. Eli finished splinting the leg and stepped back. He'll need rest fluids, maybe a transfer for surgery if the fracture is severe, but he'll make it. Relief flickered across Boone's face, brief but unmistakable. Clara May took a step closer. And you're bleeding, Boone. He looked down at his torn hands, then shrugged. They'll heal. Always do. I came here for him, not for me, he said, voice low but firm. The finality of his words silenced any argument. Whiskey stirred faintly, pressing his nose into Boone's wrist near the gurney. The man's stern features softened almost imperceptibly. Outside, the storm rumbled louder thunder echoing off the mountains. Inside, the fragile calm of the hospital held anchored by the strange side of a soldier who had carried a pup from the jaws of the earth itself, refusing all care except for the small life in his arms. The storm pressed harder against the hospital windows, wind groaning through the seams like an uninvited guest. The waiting area had thinned. A few patients dozed in chairs under buzzing lights. Clara May returned to the gurney where Whiskey rested. Breathing steadier now that fluids trickled into his tiny veins beside the bandaged leg, lay a bundle of mud-caked fur, fragile, but undeniably alive. As Clara May adjusted the pup's IV line, her fingers brushed the collar hidden beneath clumps of dirt. She frowned and motioned to Tula Rain for a pair of shears. With careful precision, she cut away the encrusted fabric until the collar came free. It was a strip of worn leather, scratched and stiff from water. One thing stood out, a small metal plate glinting faintly beneath the grime. She rubbed it clean with gauze until the letters revealed themselves. Whiskey. Clara May read aloud. The name was engraved in neat capital letters, followed by a faint blurred engraving. Her pulse quickened. This was no stray. Boone McAllister stepped closer, looming over the gurney with the restraint of a man cautious not to intrude. His eyes flicked to the tag and then to Clara May Whitlow. So he belongs to someone. It wasn't exactly a question. Yes, Clara May replied. She handed the collar to Silas Boone, who had just entered through the side door, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. Silas was in his mid-40s, tall, broad-chested sandy hair cut short. The type of man who carried the quiet weariness of too many calls and too many storms. His uniform clung damply to his frame, but his voice remained steady. You called, he said, addressing Clara May. She nodded. This pup isn't just any dog. He has a name. Someone owns him. Someone who might still be out there. Silas examined the collar thumb, tracing the letter's brow furrowed. Whiskey. That rings a bell. He pulled a small notepad from his pocket, flipping through the pages. 3 days ago, we logged a missing person report. The Moore family Tahu Blackwolf and Lila Rose McKenna. They were hiking near Black Ridge Canyon when the landslide hit. They haven't been found. The words landed heavy in the room. Tula Rain, standing at Clara May's side, drew in a sharp breath. Amos Thatcher, the security guard, muttered, That canyon's a death trap. Silas continued tone factual, but edged with concern. According to the report, the Moors had a young German Shepherd pup with them. Name listed: Whiskey. If this dog made it out alive, maybe they're still in there. Boone's jaw tightened, muscles rigid. His hands curled into fists, dried blood cracking along his knuckles. He stared at the pup, then the rain-streaked window, measuring the distance between what was and what could be. If Whiskey survived, he said slowly, voice low and unwavering, then they still have a chance. People don't just vanish, not if they had him with them. The intensity in his tone silenced the room. Even Tula, often shielding her heart behind sarcasm, felt the weight of his conviction. Clara May looked at Boone. "You dug him out, from under the landslide." Boone nodded once. He cried. I followed the sound. He paused, gaze distant, replaying every handful of dirt, every collapsed breath. I thought it was a child at first. When it wasn't, it didn't matter. Life is life. Silas closed his notepad, slipping the collar into a protective bag. "I'll need to radio this in. We might have to reopen the search." He gave Clara May a curt nod. "Good call, sending the picture." As Silas stepped outside to his patrol car, Clara May turned back to Boone. There was grit in his posture, the look of a man who had carried burdens too heavy for too long. She wanted to ask why he'd risked his life for a stranger's pup, why his voice carried the timbre of regret when he spoke of leaving things behind. But she held her tongue. Whiskey stirred on the gurney, amber eyes blinking open. A weak yip, ears twitching toward Boone. Clara May noticed how the pup's breathing seemed steadier whenever Boone was near. "He trusts you," she said quietly. Boone didn't look at her, only at Whiskey. "I carried him out. He trusts the arms that didn't drop him." His words carried more weight than their simplicity suggested. Moments later, Silas returned, rain dripping from his jacket. Sheriff's office confirmed they'd send a team at first light. "Weather's too unstable tonight and the ground's still shifting," he said. "But this changes things. The Moors might still be alive." Amos exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. 3 days buried under that canyon. Feels impossible. Boone shot him a sharp glance. "Nothing's impossible if there's still breath," he said, not as argument, but as a creed carved from years of refusing to let despair dictate outcomes. Tula busied herself tidying the station, but her eyes lingered on Boone. She had lost a husband once and learned to sniff out hollow hope. Yet what she heard in Boone's voice was not naivety. It was battle-forged certainty. She didn't fully believe in miracles, but she recognized conviction when it stood in front of her. The rain eased for a moment. The hospital lights buzzed louder in the lull. Clara May felt the storm had shifted inside the walls, too. What began as a man delivering a wounded animal had become the doorway into the fate of a missing family. She laid a hand on Whiskey's fur, softening her voice. "We'll do everything we can for them." Boone's reply was quiet but resolute. "We'll find them." Whiskey hadn't crawled back into the world for nothing. The storm deepened over Denver that night, rain hammering down in silver sheets across the city's rooftops, filling gutters and echoing through narrow streets like a chorus of whispered warnings. From the hospital windows, the parking lot gleamed under flickering lamps, each puddle a rippled mirror beaten by the steady drum of raindrops. Inside, the emergency department held the same tense quiet it had carried since Boone McAllister appeared with the wounded German Shepherd pup. Whiskey, now stabilized, lay on a warmed blanket near the nurse's station. His amber eyes flicked open occasionally, dulled by pain, but glimmering with the stubborn spark that had kept him alive. His breathing came easier, the rise and fall of his chest steadier than when he first arrived. Tula Rain, who hours earlier had muttered complaints about animals in her ER, now checked his vitals with unexpected gentleness. She murmured about how her late husband once rescued stray cats near the mine entrances back home, though she quickly hid the softness behind her usual sharp tone. Boone sat nearby in a plastic chair, hunched slightly forward, mud-streaked hands loosely folded, gaze fixed on the pup, as though every second mattered. When Clara May Whitlow approached with a cup of coffee, he looked up the weight in his gray-blue eyes, speaking of a man carrying more than one kind of exhaustion. "You still haven't let anyone look at those cuts," Clara May said, softly nodding at his hands. He shrugged. "They'll close." "I've had worse. You could get an infection," she pressed. He gave her a faint, humorless smile. "Infections take time. Whiskey doesn't have that luxury." Thunder rolled low over the mountains, and Clara May decided to press further. "Tell me exactly what happened. How did you find him?" Boone's gaze shifted, unfocused, replaying every detail in his mind. His voice, low but steady, carried the cadence of someone used to reporting under scrutiny. "I live out near the ridge not far, cabin tucked in the trees. I don't keep much company, just me and the quiet. That night the storm broke early. He'd gone out to check the water lines, making sure the creek behind the cabin wasn't flooding. That's when he heard it. Thin, sharp, carried on the wind. At first he thought it was an echo, maybe a memory, but it came again, a cry. Not human, but close enough to stir something in him. He paused, rubbing a hand across his face, smearing dried mud along his cheekbone. "I followed it," he said, across slick rocks down into the canyon where the landslide hit. The ground shifted underfoot, unstable, yet the sound was clear, a faint, muffled bark. He started digging. Bare hands, nails against stone. Hours, maybe. Time didn't matter. There was only the cry. When he pulled the pup free, Whiskey was half-buried limp, but still alive. Boone wrapped him in his jacket and carried him here. Amos Thatcher, the security guard, had drifted closer during the recounting. Arms crossed, skepticism written across his face. Yet even he leaned forward at the last words. "You're telling me that dog cried out long enough for you to find him? After days under rock and mud?" Boone looked at him, calm but unyielding. "Sometimes life refuses to quit," he said. "Sometimes it only needs one person listening." Silence settled again, punctuated by the pup's breathing and the storm outside. Clara May studied Boone with fresh eyes. She had treated veterans before men and women carrying the war, long after their uniforms were gone. But Boone's solitude, the way he spoke of the canyon, hinted at more than scars. It was exile chosen, or perhaps endured. At that moment, Silas Boone returned, shaking rain from his hat, his presence grounding the room with firm, steady authority. "The sheriff's office is considering reopening the search at dawn," he announced, "but we'll need coordinates." "Boone, if you can give us that, it might save lives." "I can lead you back," Boone said slowly. "Marked the spot with a torn sleeve from my jacket before I left. Figured I might need to return." Clara May caught the flicker in his voice, not just practicality, but a soldier's instinct. The reflex to prepare for extraction. She wondered what ghosts had taught him to never leave a battlefield unmarked. At that moment, Daisy Pike, a paramedic just finishing her shift, poked her head into the ER. Petite, but wiry, with short dark hair cut around her jawline, her sharp wit and fearless reputation usually preceded her. Fatigue dimmed her spark tonight, but her curiosity lit when she saw the pup on the blanket and Boone mud-caked in the chair. "What's this about a search?" she asked, shrugging off her raincoat. Silas gave her the shorthand, and Daisy's brows rose. If the Moors were alive after 3 days out there, they'd need more than hope. They'd need medical support on site. Clara May nodded firmly. Then we prepare. The group fell into quiet agreement. Each person understood the gravity, even Tula, who rarely let herself believe in long odds. She muttered about wasted resources, but her eyes lingered on Whiskey, whose weak tail thumped once against the blanket at the sound of voices. Boone, however, remained the anchor of the moment. His knuckles whitened as he clenched his fists, not in anger but as a silent vow. He had dug a pup from the earth because he refused to let its cries fade unheard. Now, knowing a family was missing, he would not rest until the echoes of survival were answered. Clara May Whitlow met his eyes. There was no bravado, no performance, only certainty, and certainty was exactly what this fragile hope needed. She turned to Silas Boone. "Tell the sheriff. I'll back the search medically. If there's even a chance." "Then we don't walk away." Boone finished her thought with quiet force. Thunder rolled again outside rain, lashing heavier, as if the mountain itself mourned those still trapped beneath its weight. But within the hospital walls resolve had been forged unspoken, yet undeniable. At dawn, they would return to Black Ridge. And if life still lingered beneath the earth, they would find it. By the time the rescue team gathered rain sheets, blurred Denver's mountain skyline, and Black Ridge Canyon loomed darker than ever, its cliffs slick with mud runoff, roaring like distant thunder. The air smelled of pine-wet stone and the metallic tang of earth torn open by the landslide. Boone McAllister stood at the edge of the convoy posture, stiff, though fatigue pulled at every muscle. His clothes had been changed into lone gear from the sheriff's office, a weatherproof jacket, heavy boots, and gloves, but his hands still bore raw scrapes from frantic digging the night before. Whiskey limped beside him, a bandage wrapped around his front leg, small body trembling in the cold eyes, bright with determination. The search team was a patchwork of professionals and volunteers. Silas Boone, tall and broad, with silver streaks in his short, dark hair, coordinated with steady authority, jaw tightening whenever the radio crackled, with worsening conditions. Born and raised in these mountains, he carried the cautious weight of one who had seen too many recovery missions end in tragedy. Among them was Eli Cormack, stocky firefighter in his late 30s, shaved head, booming voice that usually lightened tense scenes. He had joined after his younger brother died in a climbing accident near the canyon, a loss that hardened his resolve to pull others back from the brink. Next to him walked Ayanna Skyfeather, a geologist from the State University. Slim and wiry, with dark eyes scanning slopes with precision called in to evaluate the canyon's stability. Her voice calmed, but her body language showed she was aware of every loose boulder and shifting patch of soil. Clara May Whitlow marched with them, medical kits slung across her shoulder. Not trained for field rescues, she refused to remain behind. Dark hair damp under her hood, glasses blurred by the rain, yet her focus was unshaken. She had resolved that if lives could be saved, she would stand alongside Boone to see it done. Whiskey was carried part of the way in Eli Cormack's arms to preserve his strength. Whenever set down, the pup sniffed the air, ears twitching, then let out short, sharp barks, urging them forward. The group slowed each time he barked, scanning the ground for new signs. Hours passed in mud and cold until the canyon narrowed. Jagged scars of the landslide were evident in toppled trees and piles of rock. The rain tapered to mist, but the ground sloped treacherously, forcing caution. Near a split in the rubble, Whiskey barked with sudden ferocity, body straining toward a narrow crevice. His injured leg quivered, but he pressed on, pawing desperately at the mud. "Hold up," Ayanna Skyfeather called sharply, crouching near the rocks. "This section is unstable. If we pull wrong, the whole slope could come down." Boone ignored the warning for a heartbeat, already on his knees beside Whiskey, clawing at the soil with bare hands. Then he felt the tremor in the earth and forced himself still. He looked at Ayanna, voice rough but restrained. "Tell me where to dig, but don't tell me not to." She hesitated, then nodded curtly. "Brace the upper rocks first, Eli. Ropes and wedges. If we stabilize this section, it won't collapse when we clear the lower gap." Hands raw against stone boots sinking into the mire, the team worked swiftly. Boone dug beside them with single-minded ferocity, breath's ragged movements precise. A soldier's endurance honed through years of training surfaced once again. Whiskey whimpered and clawed at the dirt's small body, trembling but unyielding. Then faint and fragile a sound drifted through the crack, so thin it could have been mistaken for wind. A voice. "Help, please." Clara May Whitlow's head snapped up, eyes wide. "That's human. Female. She's alive." The canyon fell silent for a breath, as every rescuer absorbed the truth. Boone's throat tightened, whispering like a vow. "We've got her." Work doubled in intensity. Rocks hauled aside, mud cleared in frantic handfuls. Silas Boone barked orders with the clarity of a seasoned commander coordinating ropes and anchors. Eli Cormack cursed under his breath, but moved faster, sweat and rain mingling on his skin. Ayanna Skyfeather's eyes never left the unstable slope, calling warnings whenever a stone shifted dangerously. At last the gap widened enough for Clara May Whitlow to lean forward, flashlight piercing the gloom. Her voice trembled. "I see her. She's pinned, but breathing." Lila Rose McKenna lay wedged within the narrow space hair, plastered with mud, face pale and streaked with grime. Her lips trembled as she tried to call out again, breaking into sobs of relief at the sight of the rescuers above. Boone McAllister didn't wait for instruction. He shed his jacket, slung the rope around his waist, and slid into the narrow cavity. Mud scraped his arms as he squeezed downward. The cold, damp earth pressed around him, but his focus never wavered. He reached Lila Rose, brushing debris from her face. "You're safe now," he said quietly, voice steady, though his chest burned with emotion. "We've got you." She clutched weakly at his arm. "Please, my husband." "Tahu." Boone swallowed hard. "We'll find him too, but first we're getting you out." Clara May joined moments later, crouched low. Medical kit open, she checked Lila Rose's pulse eyes, scanning bruises and cuts. She's dehydrated, exhausted, and has possible fractures. We need to stabilize her before moving. Working in the cramped space. Clara May wrapped a splint against Lila Rose's leg, while Boone braced her body to keep pressure off pinned areas. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the rush of memory. Sandsmoke Battlefield comrades buried in rubble. He heard their cries in Lila Rose's faint voice whisper, breaking with grief. "I lost brothers once. Not again, not tonight." Her eyes opened wider, confusion flickering at his words, but the tone carried comfort. Above, Eli Cormack shouted down encouragement, and Silas Boone's rope line tightened, preparing to haul. Minutes later, with coordinated effort, they lifted Lila Rose free from the canyon's grip. She gasped as fresh air hit her lungs. Her face turned toward the gray sky, streaked with mist. The team wrapped her in blankets, Clara May close, checking vitals repeatedly. Whiskey limped forward, tail wagging weakly, licking the dirt from her hand. She smiled faintly despite the pain. "Whiskey, you found me." Boone climbed out after her, chest heaving, mud streaking his face. He stood silently watching Lila Rose held safe in Clara May's care. For the first time in years, his voice cracked, not from war, but from relief. "I already buried enough on the battlefield," he murmured hoarsely. "I won't bury hope here, too." The rain ceased entirely, as if the mountain acknowledged the fragile triumph. Mist clung to the canyon floor as Lila Rose was lifted onto a stretcher. Wrapped in thermal blankets, she trembled violently. Breath's shallow eyes darting from rescuer to rescuer, seeking reassurance. Clara May whispered calm instructions, checked her pulse, adjusted the splint. Whiskey limped close, tail wagging faintly, despite fatigue pressing his wet nose against her palm, as if anchoring her to life. Boone stood nearby, jacket-soaked mud streaking his face. Exhaustion should have claimed him, yet his stance remained rigid. Gray-blue eyes never leaving the unstable slopes. One life had been pulled from the earth, but his gut screamed another remained trapped. Silas wiped rain from his brow, signaling to deputies. "We'll get Lila Rose out. Stabilize her, get her to the ambulance. The rest of us keep looking. Tahu could still be out here." His voice steady, but a flicker in his expression betrayed the odds weighing on him. Lila Rose grabbed Boone's sleeve with surprising strength. Lips cracked, voice barely audible. "Tahu! Find him!" Boone bent low, squeezing her hand. "We will," he promised, voice hoarse but unwavering. "I swear." The team pressed deeper into the canyon, navigating terrain slick with rain and cluttered with boulders from the landslide. Ayanna Skyfeather, the geologist, walked in front, flashlight sweeping across jagged terrain, calculating where a human might have been thrown or buried when the slope gave way. She stopped, frequently crouching, to study rock patterns, sharp features tightened in concentration. Beside her trudged Rufus Crane, a volunteer rescuer in his late 20s, lean and wiry, with unruly blonde hair plastered to his forehead by rain. Rufus grew up in Denver's outskirts, son of a miner, losing his father to a cave-in years ago. That memory drove him to join every rescue he could, even when lack of formal training earned scowls from seasoned professionals. His loyalty was unquestionable, though eagerness sometimes bordered on recklessness. Whiskey barked sharply, ears pricking toward a cluster of fallen logs near the canyon wall. Boone McAllister moved ahead, dropping to his knees to brush away leaves and mud. His gloved hands paused as they met resistance. Not rock, not wood, but something softer. "Over here," he shouted. Wade Bonner lumbered over muscles straining as he rolled aside debris. Ayanna Skyfeather steadied a boulder with ropes, while Boone cleared the branches. And there he was, Tahu Blackwolf. He lay unconscious, face pale, and streaked with mud, partially covered with leaves and branches arranged haphazardly, as if something or someone had tried to shield him. His lips' bluish chest rising and falling weakly. Clara May Whitlow rushed forward, medical kit in hand. "He's alive, severe hypothermia, maybe internal injuries." She peeled back the wet leaves, noting the careful layering as if Tahu had tried to insulate himself before collapsing. Smart, but he wouldn't last long. Boone slid to the ground beside him, lifting Tahu's head gently. For a moment, he saw not just a man clinging to life, but echoes of fallen brothers he had cradled in deserts far from Denver. His jaw tightened. He refused to let this become another ghost. Tahu's eyes fluttered open, briefly glazed, but aware. His lips moved without sound until Boone leaned closer. The words came ragged, barely audible. "You saved my family. You..." And whiskey. Boone's throat constricted. He gripped Tahu's hand tightly. "Stay with me. You're not done yet." Silas Boone barked orders. "We need a litter here. Get him stabilized for transport." Eli Cormack sprinted to fetch equipment, nearly slipping in the mud, but Wade Bonner caught him by the arm before he fell. Ayanna hovered nearby, warning, "Careful, the slopes are shifting. Keep weight balanced." Clara May worked with swift precision. IV inserted for warm fluids, heat packs wrapped around Tahu's core blankets signaled for. Her glasses fogged, but her focus never faltered. Calm tone as vital as any medical supply. "Tahu, listen to me. You're safe now. Stay with us. Breathe." Rain returned in a soft drizzle pattering against helmets and hoods. The canyon seemed to hold its breath as the rescuers lifted Tahu onto a stretcher. Boone walked alongside, one hand steadying the litter, the other never leaving Tahu's shoulder. Whiskey limped, close ears, low eyes wide with concern. As they reached the ridge where paramedics waited, Tahu stirred, grip tightening briefly around Boone's hand. "Don't leave us." His voice carried weight, though fading. Boone leaned close, voice low but resolute. "I won't. You have my word." Minutes later, Tahu was loaded into the ambulance beside Lila Rose McKenna. Clara May gave final instructions to paramedics, then stepped back, wiping rain from her face. Boone stood silent, watching the doors close, siren wailing into the storm. Body aching, hands raw, yet chest swelled with something fierce and unyielding. He had promised, and for once, fate let him keep it. By the time the Moors were stabilized at Denver's Mountain Hospital, word of their miraculous rescue had swept the town. The local paper ran Whiskey the Little Shepherd, who saved a family. Radio stations repeated the story hourly. Neighbors whispered in awe in cafes about the Marine who carried a mud-soaked pup into the ER. For a community too accustomed to bad news, the tale was a lantern in the storm. Whiskey himself had become a symbol. Still bandaged and weak, he rested in the veterinary wing adjacent to the hospital, visited by nurses, paramedics, even children pressing drawings against the window. His amber eyes followed quietly, tail thumping whenever familiar voices Boone or Clara May entered the room. Boone, however, felt uneasy. Not used to being called a hero, his life built on survival, not applause. Each handshake from grateful townsfolk reminded him of brothers in arms who would never hear such praise. Yet when Whiskey looked at him, head cocked, trusting and fierce, something shifted. Survival itself was victory. Not everyone welcomed the story. Jed Polk arrived 2 days later, stepping from a sleek black SUV onto Denver's rain-darkened streets. At 45, he carried himself with the polish of a man never denied. Tailored suit and polished boots, stark against mud-smeared trucks of rescue volunteers. Sharp features softened only by an expensive smile. Reputation for seeing land as numbers rather than roots or memories. For months, he'd courted investors to turn Black Ridge Canyon into a luxury resort, chalets perched on ridges, golf courses, carved from Meadows ski lifts, replacing old hiking trails. Environmental groups pushed back, but lobbyists were winning ground. Now, with the Moors' survival tied to whiskey and the canyon itself, public opinion shifted against him overnight. If Black Ridge was declared a protected zone, his millions in projected revenue would vanish. Jed Polk wasted no time. He requested a private meeting at the hospital under the pretense of donating to the Moors Recovery Fund. Clara May Whitlow was summoned first. She found him in a quiet conference room, seated with unnerving calm, his suit untouched by the mountain damp outside. He rose, extending a hand. "Dr. Whitlow, isn't it? The brave physician who tended to that little miracle?" Clara May, still in scrubs, crossed her arms rather than shake his hand. Tall, with tired eyes but a spine that straightened under pressure. "I was just doing my job," she said coolly. Jed's smile widened. "Yet stories spread. You've become part of a narrative that's captured this town, but we both know stories can be shaped." "What are you suggesting?" she asked, frowning. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Whiskey is a pup pulled from mud. The rest, this notion of him guiding rescuers, this heroic myth, is exaggerated. People want legends, not facts. If you clarify to the press that the dog's role has been embellished, it could prevent rash decisions about land use." He slid a checkbook across the table with manicured fingers. "Your hospital could get the funding it so desperately needs. New equipment, more staff. Everyone wins." Clara May stared, stunned. Her hospital had been struggling for years. Staff stretched thin, supplies outdated. She thought briefly of long nights patients lost for lack of resources. Then she remembered Boone, mud-streaked face, raw conviction, whispering, "I won't bury hope here, too." And she remembered Whiskey's bark echoing through the canyon, guiding them toward Lila Rose's faint cries. She pushed the checkbook back. "Whiskey is the proof, and you're asking me to erase the truth. I won't." Jed's smile faltered, hardening at the edges. "Think carefully, Doctor. Heroes fade, but debts don't." Later that evening, Boone found Jed Polk in the hospital lobby speaking with a city councilman. Boone recognized the type instantly polished predatory men who measured the worth of a place in contracts rather than scars. Polk noticed him and approached, voice warm, eyes sharp. "You must be Boone McAllister, the Marine." Boone's jaw tightened. "You carried that pup through the storm, saved a family. Remarkable. Truly." Polk's words were honeyed yet laced with calculation. "Wouldn't it be better to control the narrative? Keep it grounded." Boone's gray-blue eyes hardened quiet steel of a man with no patience for veiled games. "You weren't there. You didn't hear Whiskey bark when no one else could. You didn't see Lila Rose breathe because of him. This isn't a story, it's survival. I won't let you twist it." For the first time, Polk's composure cracked. "Be careful, McAllister. Passion makes for fine speeches, but progress demands pragmatism. Stand in my way, and you'll regret it." Boone stepped closer, voice low, steady. "Whiskey is living proof, and I swore to protect him and the truth, no matter the cost." "You don't scare me, Polk. I've faced worse than you in places you'd never dare walk." The two men locked eyes, storm against stone, until Polk finally turned, muttering, "We'll see." That night, townsfolk gathered outside the hospital, candles in hand. Children held signs reading, "Thank you, Whiskey, and hope lives." Boone stood in shadows near the door, uncomfortable with the attention. Yet when Whiskey barked softly from his crate and wagged his tail, Boone allowed himself a rare smile. Jed Polk watched from his SUV across the street, face pale under the dashboard light. He saw a town uniting around a pup and a Marine, a story too powerful to erase. For the first time in years, control slipped from his grasp. The mountain hospital settled into a rhythm of cautious optimism in the days following the rescue. Rain still swept across Denver's ridges, but inside the sterile halls, life that had clung desperately to the edge was nurtured back toward wholeness. The air smelled of antiseptic and fresh linens, yet every time Lila Rose McKenna or Tahu Blackwolf stirred, relief coursed through the staff like sunlight breaking through clouds. Lila Rose lay propped against pillows, hair freshly washed by a nurse, bruises along her cheek, fading to soft yellows. Her spirit, though fragile, shone in her warm smile. A determined woman, slender, graceful, her yoga teaching at the community center had demanded calm strength, forged in a childhood spent caring for a younger sister with chronic illness. That fortitude now carried her through recovery. Tahu, in the next bed, still pale, but no longer trembling from hypothermia, was tall, broad-shouldered, weathered face, telling of years as a park ranger guiding hikers safely through canyons. His kindness earned trust, yet pride sometimes kept him from asking for help. That pride had driven him to insulate himself with leaves and branches clinging to survival until Boone and whiskey arrived. Clara May Whitlow checked on them daily, her dark eyes softening with each improvement. For years, she had carried the quiet frustration of working in an underfunded hospital where victories were measured not by miracles, but by how little was lost. Now, Clara May Whitlow stood in the glow of something rare, a story where both husband and wife survived against impossible odds. Whiskey, too, was healing. The pup's limp was less pronounced. His fur revealed the sable and tan patterns distinctive to his breed. Only a few months old, ears too large for his head paws, comically big, yet his presence filled every room. Tula Rain chuckled when he tried to follow Clara May into restricted areas, tail wagging with fierce determination. To Boone, he was more than a pup, he was proof that life could claw its way back from darkness. The town's reverence for whiskey and Boone grew each day. An elderly woman, Martha Glenn, stooped with age and clad in decades-old knitted cardigans, hobbled into the hospital lobby with a tray of homemade pies. For the Marine and the pup, she declared, voice thin but smile wide, you gave this town back its faith. Children scribbled notes in crayon, thank you, whiskey. And Boone, you're our hero. Boone accepted their gratitude awkwardly, posture rigid as though bracing for impact. Tall, broad-shouldered, but the weight he carried was inward, a lifetime of battles leaving him wary of praise. Sitting alone on the hospital lawn one evening, he admitted to Clara May, I never saved enough. Not overseas, not my unit. This feels like I borrowed hope I didn't earn. Her hand rested lightly on his arm. Boone, you did more than save them. You reminded all of us what it means not to give up. That's not borrowed. It's given, he murmured. Meanwhile, Jed Polk lingered in the shadows of town, watching his influence erode. His suits no longer drew admiration, but suspicion. Attempts to push the narrative of exaggeration failed. Calls to councilmen went unanswered, bribes rejected. For the first time, power slipped from his manicured hands. One crisp afternoon, golden light broke through the clouds. The Moore family gathered outside the hospital. Lila Rose McKenna leaned on a crutch, Tahu Blackwolf, steadying her with one arm. Whiskey bounded across the grass, still bandaged but gleeful ears flopping as he tumbled after a ball tossed by one of the nurses. His bark rang sharp and joyous, a sound echoing hope rather than desperation. Boone stood at a distance, hands in jacket pockets, content to watch. He had planned to slip away quietly once the family was whole again, returning to his cabin in the woods where silence was easier than connection. But Lila Rose beckoned him closer with a smile. Boone, she said, voice carrying the authority of someone used to guiding a room you don't have to leave. You brought us back from the dark. You belong here with us. Tahu Blackwolf extended a hand grip firm, despite lingering weakness. We want you to stay, Boone, not just as the man who saved us, but as family. Our door is open if you'll have it. Boone's throat tightened. He had walked through deserts, weighted rivers of blood-built walls around his heart so high he believed no one could climb them. Yet here, amid laughter and the playful bark of a shepherd pup, those walls trembled. He looked at Whiskey, who paused mid-run to bark at him, tail wagging furiously, as if echoing the invitation. For the first time in years, Boone allowed himself to imagine a life not marked by loss, but by belonging. He stepped forward, nodding slowly. "Family," he said, voice low, unsteady. "It's been a long time since I had one. Thank you." As the sun dipped behind the peaks, the hospital lawn glowed golden. Whiskey bounded toward Boone, leaping into his arms with surprising strength, barking again, sharp and joyful, his eyes fixed on the man who had carried him from the mud. In that bark was no plea, no cry of desperation, only gratitude. In the end, the miracle was not thunder in the sky, but a quiet yes in the human heart. A Marine who refused to walk past a small cry. A doctor who chose truth over convenience. A pup who would not stop calling. Ordinary lives moved by extraordinary grace. If you look closely, you see how God often works, not always in spectacle, but in the nudge to listen to, turn back to dig with torn hands, because a life is worth it. The miracle is courage, when fear says quit, compassion when bitterness would be easier, a community choosing to protect and not profit. Carry this into your day. Listen for the small cries others miss. Step toward hard places with gentleness. Tell the truth when it costs you. Offer strength to someone who has run out of theirs. When you do, you are part of the same river of mercy that carried this story to a good ending. For those who believe, let this be a reminder that hope still writes itself into muddy pages. Listen for quiet cries. Steady your hands when the ground shifts. May He turn your ordinary path into a doorway for rescue, healing, and home. If this story lifted you, share it with someone who needs a reason to keep going. Leave a comment about the moment that touched you most. Write Amen if you stand with us in hope. Subscribe to the channel so more people can discover stories of courage and grace. May God bless and protect every viewer and every home represented here today. Amen.